My name is Cecilia Poulain. Welcome to the Pathway to Partnership podcast, where we talk about what it really takes to succeed as a woman lawyer in a law firm. My brother recently said to me, all organizations are basically heartless. When they don't need you anymore, they'll let you go. I believe law firms can do way better than that. Perhaps I'm terribly naive and idealistic, but I believe that if you want to build a thriving partnership, then you need to build heart into the organization. And the first step in doing so is to build trust. Welcome to the Pathway to Partnership podcast. My name is Cecilia Poulain. I'm a former finance lawyer, and I now help women lawyers make it to partnership and thrive when they get there. In this podcast, you'll get clarity on whether partnership is truly what you want. You'll build your confidence, and you'll master client development in a way that feels sustainable. Let's get you walking into the office every morning clear on why you're aiming for partnership, free of imposter syndrome, and confident in your ability to bring in clients without burning out. Okay, let's jump in. I recently had lunch with a partner in a mid-size international law firm, and she was telling me about how when she first joined the firm and she became a partner for the first time, she put her head down, she worked incredibly hard, and she focused on making sure her practice was a financial success. But a few months later, she was shocked to find that some of the older male partners were jealous of her and were blocking her. And the way she read the situation was that they really didn't like that a younger woman was bringing in more money than they were. And as a result of that experience, she realized that she needed to spend far more time building relationships within the firm and working out who she could trust and, perhaps more importantly, who she couldn't. Now, what struck me about that story was that she needed to do that, even in the relatively small Paris office of that organization. She needed to work out who she could trust and who she couldn't. She had to keep an ear to the ground to understand how the organization functioned. Now, on one level, I find that extraordinary because partners in a law firm rely on each other for so many different things, including their incomes, their reputation, bringing in clients, paying the bills, making strategic decisions for the firm. Now, clearly, a firm can't be working at its best if all those partners don't trust each other. Now, I've seen certain relationships in law firms in which there is a very, very high level of trust, which is often between a partner and a younger lawyer. The partner is looking out for the younger lawyer and providing them with great opportunities, and the younger lawyer is getting the work done on time and to a very high standard. But I've also met many, many lawyers who are just in it for themselves and for the money. People who you know will always act in their own interests. People that you know that you absolutely cannot trust. Now, before we go any further, let's talk about what trust actually is. In this episode, I'll be referring frequently to a book by Patrick Lencioni, which is called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And he writes extensively about trust as the bedrock of any organization, and I totally agree with him. This is how he defines it. In the context of building a team, trust is the confidence among team members that their peers' intentions are good and that there is no reason to be protective or careful around the group. In essence, teammates must get comfortable being vulnerable with each other. In other words, trust doesn't mean agreeing all the time, and it certainly doesn't mean subsuming your individual needs to the firm. What it does mean is being able to say what you think, knowing that you will be listened to, and that whatever you say or do won't be held against you. Patrick Lencioni in the book sets out his model for building a highly functional team. The bottom layer of the model is trust. And here's how it works. Teams need to trust each other so that they can have productive conflict. If they don't trust each other, either they say nothing and issues are never resolved, or conflict turns nasty and damages relationships. I've heard people talk about the meeting within the meeting, where you turn up to a meeting only to discover that the decision has already been made by a small group of people beforehand, without giving you the opportunity to express your views. That is an example of a breach of trust, in which everyone's point of view has not been respected. And perhaps there's an underlying belief that the meeting isn't the best place to make the decision in the first place. If a team is able to deal with productive conflict, in which everyone is able to express their views, a team can then confidently commit to decisions. Even if people don't agree with a decision, if they feel heard, that's usually enough to get them to commit. And once the team commits, they can then hold each other accountable for implementing the relevant decision and calling each other out when they haven't done what they said they would. This then allows the team or organisation to define and achieve common goals. So trust allows for productive conflict, which allows for commitment, which allows for accountability, which allows a team and an organisation to reach common goals. What happens when you have a firm in which people really trust each other? Well, firstly, people love working there and are willing to go the extra mile, knowing that the firm will do well by them, which means you reduce turnover, which is a fabulous way of avoiding unnecessary cost and disruption and increasing profitability. You reduce burnout and sick leave because people will be able to say when they're stressed, overwhelmed, exhausted, or can no longer see the meaning in what they're doing. Partners share clients with each other, knowing that the other partner won't steal their client. Women don't need to work on maternity leave because they know that the day they come back to the office, they'll recover their files. People work together more effectively. There are fewer unresolved conflicts. I personally feel extremely strongly about this because my mission is to work with women lawyers to become partners so that they can build law firms that work better for women and for everyone. And a huge part of building that type of law firm is to build trust. Now, you're probably thinking, well, obviously it's normal in any organisation above a particular size. Not everybody will trust each other. When you throw a whole lot of different personalities and values together, of course there'll be people who act in self-interested ways. My brother recently reflected to me that all organisations are basically heartless. When they don't need you anymore, they'll let you go. Now, I believe we can do way, way better than that. Perhaps I'm terribly naive and idealistic, but I believe that if you want to build a thriving partnership, then you need to build heart into the organisation. And the first step in doing that is to build trust. So, we've talked about what happens when you don't build trust and why it's so important. Now let's look at how you go about it. Firstly, be trustworthy yourself. That means putting a premium on doing what you say you're going to do, and if it turns out that you can't, then communicating that. So it also means being realistic about not taking on more than you can actually deliver. Second, as Patrick Lencioni says, demonstrate vulnerability. I'd like to quote him again. So he writes, "The most important action that a leader must take to encourage the building of trust on a team is to demonstrate vulnerability first." A couple of years ago, I had the pleasure of meeting Ozgur Khan Kahal. Now, Ozgur is the Director of Pro Bono for Europe at DLA Piper, and she applies this every day in the work she does with her team. She tells them about her struggles. She tells them when she's been to a difficult meeting. She tells them when things don't go so well with a client. But she's also learnt that the way she tells them those things is as important as what she's saying. She's learnt to be vulnerable, but to say it in a way that's confident. Now, this is really important because it normalizes vulnerability and it means she doesn't look like a victim. Now, being vulnerable doesn't mean sharing your deepest secrets at work, and it doesn't mean immediately being vulnerable with everyone. What it does mean is easing into it gently. So that's the second way to build trust. Third, and I'm actually almost shocked that I need to say that, but I will say this, but I will anyway, because I've so often seen the opposite. Treat others with the greatest respect and as human beings, whether it's the managing partner or the person who empties the garbage bin in your office early every morning. Surprisingly, people sometimes find it more difficult to treat people in positions of authority with respect than the cleaners. Both deserve your respect. Fourth, make sure that your firm is doing all it can to train and coach the younger lawyers. I've heard of firms in which they keep teams lean and mean in order to keep costs low, but that means that partners and senior associates simply don't have the time to train the juniors. And then, guess what? The juniors leave. They don't trust that the firm has their best interests at heart, because in fact the firm doesn't have their best interests at heart. Now this strikes me as extraordinarily short-sighted. Next, treat your relationships with your colleagues with the same importance as your relationships with clients. Go to firm events. Invite as many colleagues as possible for coffee and lunches. This matters. If you aren't consciously building relationships with others, then how do you expect to build trust? And finally, but certainly not least, if you have an issue with someone, take it up with them directly. I, perhaps more than anyone, have often been guilty of talking to a friend when I have an issue with someone. Now, this makes me feel better. It relieves my emotional pressure, but it's actually pretty immature. The more mature thing to do is to learn how to have those difficult conversations and to have the courage to speak to the person concerned. If you're in a position to do so, make sure that everyone in the firm builds those skills. These skills are important not only for building trust in the firm, but also for our work as lawyers. And it's a large part of the work I do with women lawyers. It's about supporting them to have those difficult conversations. So, that's it for this episode. We've talked about why trust is the bedrock of any well-functioning law firm. We've talked about what trust actually means and how trust feeds into productive conflict, commitment, accountability, and ultimately the results that a firm is able to achieve together. We've looked at what it feels like to work in a firm where people trust each other. And we've gone through 6 concrete ways in which you can build trust in your own firm, starting with being trustworthy yourself, demonstrating vulnerability, treating everyone with respect, investing in the younger lawyers, and taking your internal relationships as seriously as your client relationships, and having the courage to address issues directly with the person concerned, rather than going around them. Now, I want to finish this episode paraphrasing the words of Reem Al-Sayegh. Reem is a wonderful partner. She's a banking partner at Linklaters in Dubai. And this is what she said to me. She said, "My partners are my closest friends. I have always felt that my different opinion has been valued. Especially during COVID, I expressed very different opinions and things got very heated, but my partners still said that they appreciated my opinion. I have always felt supported." Wow, what a great definition of trusting relationships. Wouldn't it be wonderful if every person, in every team, in every law firm, felt the same? Now, I believe that if firms consciously work on building trust, this is possible. Could I suggest that you take a few minutes after listening to this episode to think about how much you trust the people around you and how much they can trust you? In previous episodes, I've suggested specific exercises, but I don't want to in this episode because it depends on your particular circumstances. Maybe you're already part of a team that functions well. Maybe you need to build more trust with more people around you. And perhaps you're in a position to implement training sessions that increase the level of trust across the firm. Whatever it might be, I hope this episode has given you something to think about. Thank you so much for joining me on the Pathway to Partnership podcast. As always, I really appreciate it. I hope that this episode has helped you to think about your professional relationships slightly differently. And if you're finding this podcast useful, please subscribe. Please share it with a colleague. Please leave a review so that together we can help more women make it to partnership and thrive when they get there. And if you'd like to stay in touch, head over to www.ceciliapoulin.com. You'll find a free guide which is called How to Make Partner that lists the 6 biggest mistakes I see women lawyers making when they're going for partnership. Until next time, remember, you don't have to do this alone, and you get to define success as a woman lawyer on your own terms. Thanks so much for listening.